Hi, I'm Moose, and on the last episode of Playing with Powers, we explored Spider-Man's final gasps in the 16-bit era, the amazing animated series, and the 3D game that showered us in fan service and free unlockable costumes, a tradition that, yes, the new game from Insomniac will indeed continue. This week, we're looking at Spidey's cinematic tie-ins and the games inspired by that new wave of Spider-Mania. So, step into the squared circle, strut like you've got a symbiote, and deliver us from... Because this is part 3, the movie games, 2002 to 2008. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man perfectly captured Peter Parker's plight, the conflict at the heart of his character, and the corniness that makes Spider-Man so endearing. I would like to see him crack a few more jokes, but considering this was 2002, I was just thankful Spidey wasn't swinging around in a black leather jumpsuit. The movie shattered box office records, and outside of the theaters, Spider fans were showered with a huge wave of movie tie-ins. And while I'd love to do a whole video just about those toy web shooters, we're here to talk about games. Specifically, Spider-Man, the movie, the game. Spider-Man the Movie was built off the bones of the 2000 Neversoft title, and the core gameplay loop is extremely similar. You alternate between web-slinging sky chases and awkward interior levels with frustrating stealth sections and a crappy camera. The 6th-gen graphics are technically a step up, but they're a little dull compared to the comic book colors of the 2000 game, and the unenthusiastic voice acting from the movie's stars doesn't help.
I should be able to get back out the same way I got in. And only a couple zillion heavily armed androids between me and it. No prob.
Tobey Maguire was never the most dynamic Spider-Man, but he sounds like he's on Valium throughout this whole game.
Scorpion? Disappeared.
I feel bad for him, but I can't help hoping.
Willem Dafoe does a decent job.
Meeting you today is an unexpected bonus.
But Kirsten Dunst and James Franco didn't even bother to show up. And neither did the Macho Man Randy Savage, yeah! The only standout is Raimi mainstay, Bruce Campbell, who steals the show as the smarmy narrator in all 3 movie adaptations.
Well, I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. If you press the left trigger while crawling on a wall, you'll web zip in the direction you're crawling. Huh? Who's your daddy?
The game itself is nothing to write home about, but it's always interesting to see movie universe versions of characters that never made it to the screen. Long before Homecoming, we got to battle the Shocker, the Vulture, Scorpion, and if you had an Xbox, Kraven the Hunter. There was also a cool bonus mode where you could replay the game from the POV of Harry Osborn as a good guy Green Goblin, and unlockable skins based on Alex Ross's unused concept art. It was decent for the time, but today the game has largely been forgotten thanks to the shining success of Spider-Man II. Raimi's filmic follow-up improves on its predecessor in nearly every way, unless you prefer Chad Kroeger and Josie Scott to Dashboard Confessional. For me, it's Dashboard, hands down. And similarly, developer Treyarch's second Spider-Man game blew the first out of the water. 3 years after GTA 3 ignited the open world revolution, Spider-Man II introduced superpowers to the wide-open sandbox. Instead of individual levels, the game gave you a massive map of New York City to explore with the all-new web-slinging engine created by Jamie Fristrom. In earlier games, you just sort of shot webs up into the sky. They never attached to anything or affected the way you swung. You might as well just be flying. But for Spidey 2, Fristrom developed a system that shot a sphere of invisible lines out of Spider-Man every time he fired a web. The rays scanned all the physical objects in the environment around them, kind of like how a bat uses echolocation, and then selected the optimal point for the most cinematic swing. Top that off with an awesome arsenal of moves and in-air tricks, especially the classic web catapult, and you have a game that's an utter joy to navigate, with inertia, physics, and raw speed that gives a real sense of urgency to moving across the city, even if you're just delivering a pizza. Unfortunately, the rest of the game hasn't aged as well as the web slinging.
Well...
The open world feels pretty empty compared to the heavily populated sandboxes of the modern age, and it forced you to complete repetitive side quests in order to rack up the hero points you need to continue the story, most of which boiled down to chasing a car, beating up bad guys, chasing a car and then beating up bad guys, or rescuing balloons for hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of crying children.
I lost my balloon!
Speaking of the story, it sticks fairly close to the plot of the film, but we do get a few more non-movie cameos like Black Cat, Rhino, and my favorite, a subplot involving Mysterio, who engineers an alien invasion of the Statue of Liberty and gets taken out with one punch despite his hilariously long life bar.
I will destroy you utterly. You will bear witness to the majesty and glory of my power. You have trifled with my...
Whoa! That was sick, dude!
For all the game's faults, Spider-Man 2's web swinging has never been matched, not even by the spiritual sequel Energy Hook made by Fristrom himself. Future Spidey games would simplify the mechanics since its complexity could be a barrier to just pressing start and immediately feeling like the ultimate Spider-Man. Released a year after Spidey 2, The Ultimate Spider-Man was an interesting experiment in adaptation. Instead of being based on a comic book storyline, the game tried to add to the canon of the alternate universe Ultimate series.
This is how it all began. Which, of course, leads to nonsense like this.
It opens up with an awesome flashback reliving Peter's football field battle against Venom, who you later get to control with a moveset that lets you fling cars and eat innocent people to recharge your power. And if Venom's not evil enough for you, you can even play as the Green Goblin himself in Battle for New York, a sequel to the DS version of the game. Back on consoles, when you're in Spidey's shoes, you web around the city in a simplified take on Spider-Man 2, but it's dragged down by this baffling mechanic that makes you climb the web mid-swing to gain height. Still, the cel-shaded graphics are a stylistic improvement over Spidey 2, the gameplay is solid enough, and the story oozes with love for the Ultimate Universe.
You don't say.
Ultimate Spidey creators Brian Michael Bendis and Mark Bagley were heavily involved in the production, and the game was intended to be a canonical entry in their legendary run, taking place somewhere between issues 71 and 72, and explaining how Eddie Brock gained control over the Venom suit and incorporated that cool white logo.
Stuff that we're doing in this is going to be carried on. He's going to be making sure that stuff that's happening in the comics are at least tangentially related to what's going on in the game.
Unfortunately, the realities of monthly comic book production meant that the story had evolved beyond compatibility with the game, and future issues would ignore developments like Silver Sable's knowledge of Spidey's secret identity and Peter Parker's transformation into Carnage.
You! Parker!
The plot was very loosely adapted as the War of the Symbiote storyline 2 years later, leaving the Ultimate Spider-Man game as an intriguing but ultimately failed experiment. Speaking of failures, let's talk about Spider-Man 3. Well, first I should mention Spidey's appearance in Marvel Ultimate Alliance, although we'll probably save that for an Avengers series down the road. This video is already pretty packed, and when it comes to Spider-Man 3, there's nowhere near enough time to air all my grievances about this movie here. Let's just say I had way less of a problem with Scene Kid Peter dancing than I did with the Sandman killing Uncle Ben.
What are you doing?
Instead, I'm just gonna hate on the game, although there's really not a whole lot to say about it. I bought it for my 360 thinking it would be a stunning next-gen successor to Spider-Man 2, but the game disappointed me almost as much as the movie. Superficially, it's similar to the previous entry with the same wide-open world and web slinging, but bugs and glitches turned the silky smooth aerial acrobatics of 2 into a janky, awkward mess. The mission variety is a little better, especially with the new symbiote suit, but the story is just as lame as the movie, even with the addition of Rhino, the Kingpin, and the Lizard paying off the setup that the movies never would.
Parker? You got something to add?
Oh, sir.
This was also the first Spider-Man game to incorporate QuickTime events, because nothing makes you feel more powerful than pressing a button and watching the game play itself.
You've survived that fall? Well, I'm done here either way.
There were actually 3 different versions of this game, the main one for 7th gen consoles, a 2D portable game, and a downgraded port with different gameplay for PS2 and some obligatory waggle controls thrown in for the Wii.
Yeehaw! Get along, little doggy.
But honestly, you'd be better off playing Spider-Man Friend or Foe instead of any of these. It's a stylized, kid-friendly take on the movieverse with colorful graphics, awesome co-op, and appearances from heroes like Blade and Iron Fist, and a globe-trotting adventure that's a nice change of pace from New York. Aesthetically, it almost feels like Kingdom Hearts set in the Raimi-verse, and it was a breath of fresh air compared to the slog that was Spidey 3. After the lackluster reception to the movie, Raimi was burnt out and Sony canceled his Spider-Man 4 in favor of a short-lived reboot. The Mark Webb movies got a couple games too, but not before we got our first glimpse into a much larger Spider-Verse. On the next Playing with Powers, how did Shattered Dimensions set us up for Enter the Spider-Verse? Did the less than amazing reboot at least have a good game to redeem it? And how will Insomniac's Spider-Man live up to the legacy that came before? Thanks for watching, everybody. We're in the home stretch of our History of Spider-Man series, but for now, I want you guys to tell me what you think of the Sam Raimi trilogy. More specifically, I want someone to convince me that Spider-Man 3 was actually good. Leave a comment, let me know. I got an open mind. And while you're down there, please subscribe to Now This Nerd.